We have a front view of our car, we have the top view of our car, and we have the rear view of our car. The hidden lines that you see on here depict certain holes that are in the car. For example, this is the CO2 power plant. This is my axle hole here. The center line, which is drawn across in the top view, that's going to come in handy very soon when I start out the top of the car. So basically we have a general outline of what the car is going to look like. From there, I took a pair of scissors and I actually cut out the side of my car. So the side of the car will then be drawn on the block of the wood. Now the block of wood is already pre-drilled. The hole in the back is important that we know where that is at all times. So I'm going to suggest that when you get started to draw your pattern on here, that you put your car in the vise. You take a square and you draw a square line across the top of the hole and a square line across the bottom of the hole. Then once those points are located, you take the square and you line up with those 2 points and you bring this forward the depth of the hole, which is 2 inches. So you can measure that right on the square itself if you'd like. Bring this forward 2 inches and then connect. That way you know where the hole is drilled, so there's no chance of you, as you lay your pattern out, of not knowing where the hole is and running into problems later on. Okay, then the pattern, you can actually use that hole to kind of line up with your hidden lines here, where that hole is located. And then just bring the pattern down even with the bottom of the wood. Now make sure you got this 90-degree corner here on your left lower side as you lay this car out. Okay, then it's just a matter of tracing the pattern. So I'll start tracing the pattern on around, all the way around the whole outside edge. Once the pattern is traced, I'm then going to place, or keep the pattern in place, and I'm going to mark where the axle holes need to be drilled. So I've already got those marked on my pattern, so I'm just going to use a scratch awl, and I'm just going to poke right through the paper, indicating where I need to drill these axle holes. Okay, so once I've done that, I then have some dimples right here where I'm going to drill. Now, this would be a great time. I know some people are going to have parts of their car cut out. Let's say, for example, if you wanted a hole removed right here, which would be the easiest to do because all you have to do is drill a hole. Let's say you wanted to remove wood right there. Well, you would, again, if that were the case, you're going to figure out what size drill bit you're going to use. And we have an index all the way up to a 1/2 inch. We even have drill bits bigger than that if you need them. But, so if I figure out that I need a 1/2 inch hole right there, or maybe a 7/16 inch hole there, I can select and use with the bit selected, and before I cut anything out, I'm going to drill these holes. So I drill the hole here that goes all the way through. If I had holes coming in from the other direction or something, I don't know, everybody's car is a little different. This is the time to drill it out, is when you have a situation where the car is still flat and it can sit on the flat bed of the drill press. So that's the easy time to cut it out. If you're not having any holes, then the next thing we do is we want to drill the axle holes. The drill bit that you will need will be found behind the teacher's desk. It'll be in this block right here. It says CO2 dragster on it, and it has an 11/64 inch drill bit in the block. And that's the one that you will need for drilling your holes. Alright, we need to chuck the bit. So you want to open the jaws and get the bit in. Make sure that enough of the bit is sticking out so it's going to cover the distance of your block. The chuck key. Make sure when you're drilling on a piece of scrap wood, and that the bit, if it were to continue all the way through, would go through the hole in the table. And try to drill on a spot that hasn't been drilled before. It'll give a much cleaner hole. Okay, so we have our block. Drill press, check your speed. Speed looks good. And right on down through. Okay, and then the other side. use the drill press for this operation because we want straight, accurate holes. Now we're at the bandsaw, so we're going to start to cut our car out. Just a couple other things I want to mention before I start. I know that I've left enough room around the hole. Remember, you have to have an 1/8 inch of space around the hole, so I've even moved these lines out just a little bit from where my original pattern was, just so I know I'm going to be shaping and sanding and so forth. You can definitely see that I'm going to miss the hole out here. If there was any question, I might extend that out a little bit further as I get ready to cut. I'm going to use a lot of relief cuts here. Remember, you can't back up with the blade running. You need to stop the blade. If the blade is well into the wood, you have to stop the blade and then back up before you can proceed. So a lot of relief cuts. I'll start with those first, and then we'll start cutting the car out. I need to raise the upper guide assembly up to the height of the car, which means I need to be an 1/8 inch above the wood. So, and again, I don't need to measure that, just estimate that, get that set. No hands inside the window, keep those in front, around the side, or around the back. Okay, my first cut is down into the deepest part of the curve. Okay, when I'm there, I'm going to reach down and stop. And then come out. And now the next cut that I make, well, that piece will fall away, come from the front, that will fall away. I'm going to make another relief cut back here. I'm going to show you what I use. It's called a nibbling technique, where we don't have to stop the blade every single time. I'm going to make one relief cut, so you can see that. And again, I need to stop the blade because I'm too far. My blade is buried in the wood, so I got to stop it. Get out of it. Okay, now I'm going to proceed on with the nibbling technique. You're going to see me make a cut, then another cut right beside it, right beside it, right beside it. It's a way of doing things by increasing the size of the saw curve without having to shut the machine off each time. That's the nibbling technique where you just continue to saw, just cleaning out the curve next to it each time. And that will save you from having to shut the machine off each time. All right, now I can finish this cut here. Front. Okay, I can finish the cut along the back. Don't try to turn too much with the saw. Just pretty much make straight cuts. I'll use my sanders to clean up most of the curves. And as before, everything is pretty much a roughing cut. Stay well away from my line. I've got a little bit of a curve down here. I can do that little bit of a curve with probably just the drum sander. This one here, I can probably take out part of it. Always aware of where your hands are, so you're not going to slip into the blade. Okay, so I've roughed out the shape of my car at this point. The next thing I can do is I can sand the shape with the drum sander. I can get that smoothed out, which will probably be the next thing I want to do, and then I'm going to put the line on for the top view. I'll do that after that. Alright, this is our designated drum sander. This particular drill press, we don't use it as a drill press anymore. We use it pretty much just as a drum sander. You'll notice we have two different sized drums. We have the smaller drum and a little bit larger drum. You can kind of determine what you're going to need. You can see that drum right there is not going to fit into my curve. That's a little too big. Same thing back here. That drum right there is a little bit too big. So I'm going to use the smaller drum on those areas. Some of these larger areas here, then I want to use the other drum. But to get started, since I have the small drum in there already, if I need to change something, we'll use the chuck key, and that's always hanging up here on the right. Okay, so I can bring my bit down, my drum down. I have to make sure that it's going to cover the distance of the car. So make sure you're down far enough for that. Then lock it into place with the quill lock here. Okay, we're going to reach up, and we'll turn it on. Okay, everything is again just rough. I mean, you can fine tune things later. You don't have to be right down to your line. As long as you kind of smooth things out, you're good to go. So that was the small drum. Now I'm going to get the bigger drum on there and clean up some of these larger areas. Okay, got the large drum in place. So I'm going to clean up some of these areas. Your car is a lot easier to work on when it's flat like this. If you start having it cut up, and as you'll see as we start to cut out the top, then it's a little harder to get at some of those areas. So do most of your sanding, most of your roughing out to where you want it with the car in this flat position. All right, another place you can clean the car up. You probably wouldn't use this as much as you would the drum sander, but another place would be the disc sander. So if you need to use a disc sander, come over and do some fine tuning with that as far as the straight surfaces go and the convex surfaces. Now here I've lost my line, but I know that if I keep the car flat and just kind of shape it a little bit just to straighten it out a little. That may be all I need just to kind of straighten it out. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we've got our car fairly well shaped the way we want from the side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a center line on the car, and we're actually going to draw the shape of the car right onto here. If I were to use the pattern like this, you can see that by the time it gets around all the curves, it's not going to fit. So it's too hard to judge that way. So we're just going to draw it right on there. That's the easiest way to do it, but we have to start by getting a center line. Now it's always easier if you can have the vise hold your piece as you work on this. You're going to take a rule and a sharp pencil. The block is 1 5/8 inches wide, so that means you need to mark 13/16. That's half of 1 5/8. You need to mark that in several places along here. That's 13/16. And I'll do a couple on the top. Now I've got a couple of circle templates. The nice thing about these is they're flexible. They make great straight edges because they can follow curves. So I'm going to place this down onto the car where I made my 2 marks and then start making the center line. Okay, I'm going to extend that right up over the top. And down the bottom. Okay, so there's the center of your car. Now this is going to be my reference line as I begin to cut the car out, so I can keep things symmetrical. And I'm going to leave that line on to the very last thing, and then I'll be taking that line off. Here's my pattern. I'm going to line up the axle points. Here's my axle hole right here. I'm going to line it up with that axle hole, looking at it from above. And then I'm going to mark where things are. Okay, so like for example, this is where this angle ends right here. Okay, and then I'm going to take a square and I'm going to draw that, transfer that point to the other side. So I've got this side marked and I've got that side marked. Okay, same thing's going to happen with the curve right here. So if I line up my axle point and I figure out where the curve is going to occur right about here. So I'm going to transfer that point across. So I've got my curve here, and that's the front angle of the car. Now, if you notice my pattern here, the front angle of the car is a 1/2 inch across. I know that from when I drew the car. So that means I go a 1/2 inch, or excuse me, a 1/4 inch this direction and a 1/4 inch this direction. So that will give me the total of a 1/2 inch. So now to get the front of the car completed, all I have to do is take again the flexibility of my circle template, line up point A and point B, and draw the line in. Okay, and then the same thing on the other side. Line up point A and point B and draw the line in. Okay, so there's the front of my car. That's much easier to do than if I was sitting here trying to hold this and trace that. And besides that, it's going to be accurate. Okay, now I need to mark the back of my car. Here's where the curve ends back here. So I'm going to line up my axle hole, again, approximately. May not be exact. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball that. It looks like it's going to end right here. Okay, again, we don't have to be totally accurate, but you can see it's well away from the axle. It's not going to get into the axle or anything like that. So now from there, I'm going to take the square again, and I'm going to trace that line across, or bring that point across. So it's right here, and it's right here. Okay, so there's the back, there's the front of the curved area. All right. Now, how wide is the curve? Well, back to your drawing again. My curve is a 1/2 inch wide. So that means I'm going to go a 1/4 inch on each side of the center line. So you can lay your rule down. You go a 1/4 inch here, a 1/4 inch here, and then transfer that to the back, 1/4 and a 1/4. Then I'm going to take again my circle template, and I'm going to draw the lines. One, and here's the other. Now, the next thing I want to do is put in the curve that's right there. And I can do that with my circle template. I begin to experiment with holes until I find one where a 1/4 of the circle works. And I've experimented with this before, and I know that when I have a 1/2 inch space here, I know that the size circle I need is 1 1/8. So if I put 1 1/8 down, you'll see the black mark of the circle ends up right here. And the other part of the circle mark ends up right there. So it's a perfect match. And all I have to do is trace that arc in, just 1/4 of that arc. And just bring it across, line up again, the point here in the front, and the line here. It's a perfect match. And draw it in. So there's the front curve of my car. And again, just because of the flexibility of this, you just kind of push the circle template around until you get it in the right spot. I'm using the 1 1/8 inch circle again. And that lined it up a little short. Not bad. There, and then one here. All right, now the back part of the car. This part right here, this is going to get eliminated. This part and this part. And if I measure that, okay, I find that to be, approximately a 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/16 of an inch